I'll mention a few things that I learned later. There were 37 firemen who had gathered in the lobby of the Marriott, where I was headed, awaiting instructions, when the building collapsed and they all perished. When Tower 2 fell, it leaned slightly to the east, and I was slightly to the west. But for that, I would have been buried with many of the other people. Also, the stairwell where I happened to be had been bombed in 1993 and had been rebuilt with beams and strengthening structures. And if you looked at a profile of the building after everything was collapsed, the Marriott would look like this. And in here is the stairwell that had been protected. And it obviously had held up. And I was fortunately in there. Just a number of coincidences that led to survival. It was several days after 9/11 before regular commercial flights began. And I took the very first one out. And as the limo was bringing me across the 510 bridge, I had a weird sensation that I was no longer alive and was looking at the world as it would look if I were gone. And it looked just as it looked before. And it became obvious to me, this is not a new thought, that it really didn't make much difference whether I was alive or dead. The world goes on. There it is. Now that's a very pedestrian thought, but you know, when you're coming across the 510 bridge, somehow it seemed profound to me at the time. Barbara consciously seeks to keep my mind off this event, which with considerable success, as there's really nothing to be done about it now. I do have a mild post-traumatic stress syndrome and a touch of emphysema from the inhaled dust, for which I take medication every day, but that seems to solve the problem. There's a book being written, supposedly sometime, about the Marriott survivors. There's a Marriott Survivors organization. And believe it or not, well, you know, every day if you will notice, 9/11 is mentioned. It's the touch point. It's before or after, or it's the cause, or it's part of us now, and it's part of 9/11. It carries a whole concept which every day, no way to get it out of your mind that 9/11. In any event, there was on the 12th, the day after the 6th anniversary, the New York Times had on the front cover a picture of a fireman held by his mother at Ground Zero. And this was very common. Several, I don't know, 100 or so women, sometimes men, would be at Ground Zero with pictures. They want you to look at the picture of my son. Please, let's not forget him. And that satisfied them somewhat to show the picture. And believe it or not, on this day, on 9/12/07, the New York Times picture that was printed was a picture of Angel Warby. So it's a little hard to get it completely out of your mind when you open up the New York Times and there is a guy who was sent to his death, as it turned out, on an errand to save my life. That was really quite moving that day. In May of 2002, I arranged a meeting with Angel at Ladder Company number 12 on West 19th Street, and accompanied by Barbara and Sally, one of our daughters, and Joanne Lenhart Casulo. You'll remember the Lenhart name, dear friend, wanted to be involved in this. And we had a very tearful reunion at the Ladder 12, as many of the members of that company had perished, including little Angel. Sadly, that evening, Barbara had a stroke, and I thought I had lost her. For some time she could not speak, but after several months of varying degrees of paralysis, she has recovered. She has an active life, but with considerable less stamina than before. Talk about life-changing events. I'll admit it's been hard at times surviving to this point for some of the things that I've described. But now that I am clearly aged, I can take pleasure in looking back at a rich, full life filled with love, especially with Barbara, my high school sweetheart, and the love of my life. And as was mentioned, we've been married 65 years. And we have 5 children, 14 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. And it's been marvelous to see them grow up. Now, most of us think, I wonder what's going to happen to this child. I wonder what their life is going to be like. And as we were raising them, we had no idea that we were going to see their life. As I mentioned, our oldest daughter is 64 years old. So we've really seen what she is going to become. And that is marvelous. Certainly the pleasures of longevity include, most importantly, your family. Longevity has also allowed me to pursue some interests in Vero that have been most gratifying, including, as was already mentioned, the museum and the Riverside Theater. But in particular, I take pride in the work of the Treasure Coast Homeless Services Council, which I helped to form in 1999, and of which I'm chairman. The real engine of our success has been Louise Hubbard. Many of you would know her. She's our vice president and executive director. She is now ranked #1 in the country as the highest scoring grant writer by HUD. Now that's a pretty good, for this little small town, to have somebody have that kind of recognition. In the 10 years that we've been going, she has raised over $14 million of grants from HUD and from the state. And before we started, these funds were available, but no one was interested in getting them. It's a lot of work to get these things, and it takes some skill, as we know now from Louise Hubbard. And just recently, we've been designated to distribute and administer $2 million of stimulus money that's designed to, been designated to help with the persons who are suffering from mortgage problems and from the housing debacle that's going on. And I think that's a great tribute to Louise. It seems like she's almost been prepared for that, and I think other things will come along. The homeless present a special challenge, and at last count there were 662 homeless in our county, and this doesn't include everybody because a lot of people don't want to be counted. Maybe they don't have a green card or worse. Nearly half of the homeless have jobs. The average age of the homeless a few years ago nationally was 9. That tells you that homelessness is a problem of children. Children being raised sometimes by children, being raised by a single parent, being raised by nobody, being raised by grandparents. Unfortunately, we can never really eliminate homelessness, but we can help. And we know the Bible tells us that the poor will always be with us, and that is true, of course, of the homeless. But we can't stand by and do nothing. So the fact that we can't solve the problem is not an answer and not a discouragement. My experience of 9/11 by now is part of who I am. I have a strong sense of personal involvement in that event and its consequences, and the growing intractable threat of terrorism. And I read with great interest the report of the 9/11 Commission